I mean, any app that is not sort of its own sort of ecosystem, it's a hard slog for advertising as it is, in part thanks to Apple, right? Like, it's just hard to sort of be sort of ad supported if you're dealing with an ad network and you're not selling your own ads and all that sort of thing. But this is sort of like going to make it worse, where your functionality is useful, but you don't actually need to show a UI to achieve that functionality if AI can sort of abstract that away. Now, again, if you're a usage-based service, this could be awesome. You could actually get way more usage, right? You could be a restaurant that sells way more because you actually have 10 kitchens on DoorDash operating out of one kitchen, right? And like that's, but if you're an app that depends on time and attention, it's not so great, right? If you're Uber trying to build an advertising business, maybe it's not so great, as sort of an example. And so developers ought to think carefully, what is the trade-off here? On one end, Apple will feature me. I'll be like, if I'm first to market, a lot of people might start using me way more. There's upsides here. Plus, it's cool, and I like building cool new stuff. Versus, wait, what is the actual strategic like realities that come from losing even more control of the customer? And by the way, losing it to an entity, Apple, that thinks you're a piece of garbage and doesn't matter, right? Like, now I'm overstating that last point, but not so much. The problem, a huge problem Apple faces, this is what I wrote about today, and John sort of references, is I do think a decade ago, you would have developers already writing these app intents this weekend because it's so cool and they want to be part of the cool new thing, and we'll figure out the details later. I don't think Apple gets that benefit of the doubt anymore. Everyone looks at them a bit with a cynical eye, a bit of a side eye, saying like, what exactly why do you care about the long-term outcome of my business? Aren't you going to just sort of take all my functionality, abstract me away, cut off every bit of funding I have, accuse me of being some sort of thief stealing users' private data? I'm just trying to deliver a compelling experience. And it's hard to say they're not justified in thinking that. And you zoom out. We talked about this with the Vision Pro. Like, Apple didn't have the benefit of the doubt from developers to build experience in Vision Pro just because it's a cool new Apple thing. They're like, we'll wait and see. Well, good luck, Apple. Now you're no longer selling because you're Apple and cool. You're having to sell on numbers. And the numbers, let's assume, probably aren't great. It's a tough slog. I was there with Microsoft in Windows 8. It was really fun and exciting to talk to developers until Windows 8 launched, and then it really sucked because then you actually had to talk about numbers and sort of the realities of who was actually using these experiences. And
if the numbers were good, we would be hearing about good numbers. Yeah. So the silence is definitely notable on that front. The
silence is notable, right? And so you get to AI, even more important than the Vision Pro to the long run. John is right. You need developer participation to fully realize this vision. And was it worth it, Apple, to not compromise, to hold the line, and to have public rhetoric? I think the rhetoric was almost worse than the policies that made developers feel like crap. Was that worth it? Because today, once again, you need developers, and you have completely lost the benefit of the doubt. I hope the services revenue was worth it.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting variable over the next couple of years as all this shakes out, because it is a version of the Vision Pro developer standoff with much higher stakes, if only because there's a ceiling on how compelling Apple Intelligence will be if it's limited to first-party Apple apps and not the apps that people are actually using every day.
Because it's if they get developers helping them, this becomes much more realistic, much more quickly, because they have sort of these well-defined interfaces. They can train on those APIs, so you can have that local model. Actually, because the intents and where they're doing their training runs, they can have that as part of it, so they understand deeply all these intents that are sort of in the App Store, sort of by default as part of the training run. This could be very compelling. If you have to sort of wing it and just sort of figure it out because no one will tell you what's going on, but hey, you're the operating system, so if you could figure it out, it's doable. It's going to be a lot more difficult. It's going to break down a lot more brittle. It's going to break a lot more. And like, Apple had such a strength in terms of developer enthusiasm, and it's just incredible the way they just didn't care and destroyed this asset. And I just feel like
Well, and what I wonder
I want to
about
say I
is
don't want
whether
to say I told you so, but I do want to say I told you so because I've been telling them this for a decade and they just refuse to listen. And guess what? It was fine for a very long time because they had all the leverage. And now you wake up in 2024, you need help on the Vision Pro and you'd help to deliver AI. And you've been on everyone for a decade. Great job.
Yeah, and what I wonder is whether the leverage and the power dynamics were always skewed in a pretty unhelpful direction for developers, and they just didn't realize it until Apple was so heavy-handed and extreme about its rhetoric and its refusal to concede on any front.
This was part of the Apple magic, is they've always been like this to a certain extent, but because they did great work. Because
people were happy to drink the Kool-Aid.
And people were like, and you would have this whole thing like there's this thing called Sherlocking, right? Where Apple builds sort of like the exact feature of your app. And you'd have, the Apple podcast together saying, hey, this is how it works. Don't worry, Apple's just going to address the mass market. You can still focus on the people that really care. No, you just got screwed. But even today, you have the sort of this general philosophy of, hey, Apple's got to do the platform. It's like Apple gets so much benefit of the doubt even today. Right. And they used to get way more previously. And that way more would be really useful right now.
Yes, there's been a collective double take, and we'll see how it materializes as some of the developers either do or don't play ball. But speaking